The keynote speaker's introduction is on our website, so you can all read it the way it's supposed to be written, or you can listen to me the way I think it's even better. Because our keynote speaker, Louis Perdue, is a very interesting guy. The thing that sold me on him as a keynote speaker, because I always get to weigh in on this, is that he has a very varied background. So, I rearranged his bio to fit what I thought was a much more interesting way to read it, Karen. And it's sort of the O. Lou bio. Louis Perdue is currently publisher and executive editor of Wine Industry Insight, which includes a daily news fetch email briefing that enjoys one of the largest daily subscriberships in the North American wine industry, 25,000 plus. Oh, and he is chairman of the Center for Research on Environmental Chemicals in Humans. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's see. Hold on a second.
There you go. Thank you.
He founded Wine Business Monthly in 1991 and Wines West, a Los Angeles-based wine importer, wholesaler, distributor specializing in high-end Italian brands. Very wine-centric. Oh, and he has served as a top aide to a U.S. senator and a state governor, run congressional races, and worked as a Washington correspondent. The interesting part.
There's more.
And there's more. He has served on the faculties at UCLA and Cornell University and authored 22 published books, including The French Paradox and Beyond, and The Wrath of Grapes. Oh, and also several best-selling thrillers. Lou is currently developing Clans, a patent-pending recommendation algorithm that is far more accurate than any other in use for wine, music, books, movies, and other products. Oh, and he's also currently co-principal investigator, Stealth Syndrome's Human Study. So, let's give Louis Perdue a big round of applause for coming here to join us.
Okay, I think I'm on. No, I'm not on.
No.
We need to push the button here. I decided to start out with something that wasn't the usual wine porn with grapes and so forth. And that's a Van Gogh from 1890. A view of vineyards from Auvers. So a little bit of housekeeping. Everything in the presentation, which was actually updated about 15 minutes ago, is going to be at the page at the top there, okay? And there's my email in case anybody wants to get hold of me. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about achieving your goals through trust and credibility, because that's the essence of effective communications. I'm going to run through a lot of these relatively quickly, but they'll all be in the presentation online. Okay, so what do we hear? This is a rundown of what we've been seeing. Blogging is dead. The wine writer is dead. The rise and fall of wine blogs and other things, by one of my favorite bloggers, by the way, a really data-based guy. So he's looked at the number of wine blogs since 2005. And what we find is we find an arc, and you guys are over there on the right-hand side, a new breed of bloggers. And I think that there's been huge progress made, because blogging back at the left end of this was basically just self-indulgent ranting half the time. I mean, there's plenty of self-indulgent ranting. A lot of it takes place in the Washington Post these days. But yeah, I did write for the Washington Post at one point, so I can say that. Okay, so what's changed from the left to the right? Okay, blogging's affected journalism. Journalism has affected blogging. A lot more is expected of you guys. Okay, and that's an important thing. Journalists have started to slip in some of the standards. Attention spans have gotten shorter. I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Headlines have gotten longer. Fake news abounds. You can look at this a little bit later in detail, But this is a piece that I put together a couple of years ago dealing with what does the content spectrum look like? Because we talk about content, and content can be an ad, it can be an advertorial, an article, a blog. It's just stuff that's on the web. And there's a spectrum that runs from journalism and repertorial down to advertising, graphic advertising, etc. One of the things to recognize with this is that you get less credible as the sell increases, okay? So what you need to make sure you do is be aware of what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with an advertorial. We'll talk about disclosure because people want to know where this is coming from. So does the Federal Trade Commission in a lot of cases. So what we've got is sell robs credibility. However, implied third-party verification, like attribution and other data, improve it. So those are things that affect how credible and trustworthy you are. And the interesting thing is, we'll see in a moment, that credibility and trustworthiness are they're essential to subscriptions, clicks, traffic, in other words, making what you want to happen, okay? So the key is that blogs are a digital channel, okay? We're not talking about a form of writing. Journalism's a form of writing, fiction's a form of writing. Almost everything that you can find in a newspaper or in the news, you can find in a blog. So we want to look at what makes things that are different. And the blog is really different because people are buying into you. And the thing that you've got to realize is that you are the focus of this. It is about you, even though it isn't about you. It's about the information, but for the people who are reading your blog, it's about you. They want to know you, they want to know where you came from, and a lot of that is credibility. They want to know what your background is. What right do you have to be writing about this stuff? And one of the things that I did when I got the list from the conference, I probably have looked at 100 of the blogs, and I would say that 50 of those probably didn't have an easy link to about. They want to know about you. And even if you think it's not relevant, even if they think that, you cried when Avicii died and MGMT rules the music world, that's still a piece of you and your background. So tell people who you are. So be specific. You don't have to have a resume or a formal CV up there, but you need to have all the details. Emphasize the points that talk about your credibility. Do you judge, winery events? Do you run a winery? Or do you work in the vineyard? Are you a biochemist that studies malolactic fermentation or whatever it is? Make sure you point those out, okay? The other thing is make sure you have easy to find contact information. And by that, I really mean an email. And you're thinking, oh crap, I put my email up there, it's going to get harvested by every robot in the universe, and I'm going to get even more junk mail. And the key is that people try to use forms, but the form is all about you and your convenience, not about them and their convenience of getting hold of you. Go to this, okay, basically it says go to hell, all right? Okay, I wrote this, 2015. Okay, now this is something I'm not going to discuss in detail right now, but this is how you code in an email so that when it gets clicked on, you've got a subject matter, you've got body information, and somebody can really easily get hold of you. Okay, now let's go back to this misnomer. People have gotten shorter attention spans. The answer is the attention span hasn't gotten shorter than a goldfish. We're not destroying our attention span the expectations are very different. People are impatient. It's not about attention span. They're seeking information. They want to find the information as quickly as possible. As we'll talk in a minute, that should help you structure how you write or blog your video with photos, however you do it. Get the important news way up front, get the significant thing as fast as you can, because if you don't catch them within about the first 2 seconds, you've lost them. Okay, and we have fake news. And we all, fake news is big. The key is everybody seems to be guilty, who can be guilty. And the thing that you have to look at is, number one, the lack of expertise, the lack of credible third-party attribution. We'll go more on that. No links to the original attribution source. This is the web, people. Links are your friend. Okay, do some Googling, prove your facts, link to a credible source, government regulation, or whatever it is. It proves your point. And with attribution, you actually get to stand on somebody else's shoulders and gain their credibility as well. Here's how you tell the fake. Be skeptical. If it's sensational, be more skeptical. If it reinforces what you already think, be skeptical. Check the sources, check the logic, understand what you're looking at. There's an old saying in journalism that if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Okay? Be skeptical and suspicious. Okay. So we want to talk about some of the things that you want to do. And entertain, build a reputation, change minds, inform, drive traffic to another site, make money, promote your company, etc. Okay? So you want to do these things, but one way or another, you're getting paid per clicks. You're looking at traffic, you're trying to force or allow people to look at your advertising. You're getting paid for clicks. Okay, so attribution, we'll go back in a moment. Go beyond you, multiple corroborating sources, credible third-party data, verify the original sources. If you read a story and there's a source quoted in that, check the source, Google the quote. Just make sure that you're relying on the original source and not somebody else. Borrowed sources are problems. They can come back to haunt you. Okay. Trust and credibility, value, relevancy, accuracy, novelty, frequency, completeness, transparency, we'll get to in a moment, balance, tightly written. All of those drive clicks, visits, and those drive your ability. Now, here's the one graph here that was done by the Media Insight Project, which is part of the American Press Institute. But basically, if you look at it, the clicker's faster than I could think. So the people who follow things more frequently depend on accuracy, completeness, bias and accuracy are the most, and this is the one I wanted. Those who place a higher value on trust are more likely to interact with your site and to pay, okay, to pay for a subscription, to pay for whatever you've got that may be merchandise, pictures of your dog, whatever it happens to be. So trust is what really cements you in people's minds. Okay, attribution. If you are an expert in a given field, then make sure that your cred is up there. I am really fortunate to at NewsFetch, my industry insight, to work with a blogger you guys know, Becca Yeamans-Irwin, aka the academic wineout. And because Becca is working with scientific studies and she is a biologist,
she's got built-in cred. But she's not shy about letting you know not in a bragging way, but people know. So if you're an expert, do that. But also, go ahead and stand on the shoulders of giants, okay? Quote other people, quote your contemporaries, pull in quotes from people in your company. If you're doing a company blog, make sure there's a lot of quotes, make sure they're not made up, make sure they're in their own words, and make sure you're not trying to sell somebody with that quote, okay? And that's one of the tough things if you're in a marketing department, because there's always going to be that pressure. But the key is that attribution and credibility are a whole lot better than saying our award-winning iconic winemaker did this, and it's like you've lost people when you start with that sort of language. Okay. Direct quotes, screen caps from documents, articles, sources. Sometimes rather than just quoting something, take a screen cap of the quote and put it in, because it's a visual break, but people also look at that and say, oh, okay, that is really real. They didn't make that up, okay? Okay, now, I've already talked to Suzanne Kendrick, who's here from Wine Searcher, and I didn't put Wine Searcher up there. Blake Gray happens to be one of my favorite bloggers. Blake's writing more news. So Blake is an incredibly accomplished blogger who is now trying to use the journalism form. And right now, if we look at what he's got, Oregon Wine Growers Association complained about, okay, well, we kind of know, we read that somewhere, but where did they complain? There are articles about that. Wagner canceled $4 million worth of grape contracts from Oregon wine growers. Well, yeah, but what's the proof behind that? I mean, there's got to be a link to that. I happen to know we've published links about that. Fewer of the growers are insured. Did that come from the seat of the pants? What percentage of the growers are insured? Who said that the growers were uninsured? Is that the wine growers who said that? If so, say the wine growers said that. Wagner claimed to have tested the grapes. Well, where'd you get that? Did you talk to Wagner? Is Wagner quoted somewhere? If he's quoted somewhere, you can say something like, according to the Daily Blather, quote, oh, no. According to the Daily Blather, he says he's tested the thing. So, enhance the credibility. Sorry, I got shaken up. I should have muted things. Okay, this is another way to do it. This is a screen capture dealing with something you guys really have to look at. MailChimp will cancel your MailChimp account if you don't have your privacy rules in the email, and you can't use third-party mailing lists. And before you email to anybody, you have to somehow get in contact with them to make sure that they're okay being emailed, even though your first email that you send to them probably has pixel trackers in it anyway. But it also saves some time. It's credible, and it saved me some time. Selecting credible sources, okay? I'll run through this. It's really easy. Background, experience, education. Do they have an agenda? Does it come from a trade association? Does it come with somebody that has a financial stake in the outcome? Bias selection. Just because they happen to be around you and are easy to ask doesn't mean that they're necessarily a great source. So check that out. And disclose any possible biases, yours or the sources. And that's worth going into in disclosures. People understand that there are biases in everybody. But if you admit them up front and say, okay, was a former consulting client, formerly worked as their janitor, so people know where you're coming from. Don't let them find out by accident, because if they find out by accident, your credibility in there and other places goes down the drain. Okay, really quickly in judging data, okay? There's a lot of fake data out there, just like there's a lot of fake news, okay? Once again, do they have an agenda? who generated the data. Is it somebody who is really solid and known for data, or is this the latest startup in the delivery field or something? One more quickly, if somebody has generated a study of their customers, wherever, you want to know how many were in the study, how they were selected, what was their bias in the selection, how the questions were asked. You need the exact wording, when and where the questions were asked. All of this, margin of error. If you can't get that information from whoever published or created the survey, then the survey very likely is either done by an amateur or it's fake data with a purposely biased outcome. And I see these all the time that are generated by a company, and they're just because it's a number and somebody puts a graph together doesn't mean it's real. Graphs can lie. This one, Essentials of Sourcing. These two are in the links are in the PDF online. If you want to know more about what the pros really do, and Reuters is probably, Reuters and the BBC are probably the two organizations globally that really do tell everything straight. So, disclosure and credibility, once again, as I mentioned, it's not a trust killer, but failure to disclose beforehand kills you. Do you work for the winery, own stock in a business? Do you work for the wine supplier, beer, spirits, and cannabis company? In reviews and here's the one that we'll spend a little bit of time, okay? In reviews of wine, food, accommodations, travel, etc., did you pay for the items yourself? And there's nothing wrong with getting review bottles of wine. I mean, nobody who is in the business of reviewing wine can afford to buy all that wine unless they've won the lottery. And it's worth noting somewhere, and maybe even in a wine policy, a link to a policy statement. What is your policy? And the policy can say, we accept wines for review. You can describe it as an industry practice. Maybe this group or somebody can come up with a standard disclosure that explains to people that most wines that are reviewed are wines that were sent to them by a winery or a retailer, and there's really no other way for the maximum number of wines to be reviewed. Okay, people can understand that. They just need to know. So, were you paid for a post or a review? Okay, the Federal Trade Commission is really interested in that part. So, don't get yourself into a tangle with them over being an influencer that has been paid. Okay, personal data. This is just something that you have to be aware of. Way too big for us to go into here, but if you collect information, if you use MailChimp, if you use any sort of tracking devices on your website that looks at personal data, and that includes where they're coming from, what kind of computer they're using, whether they were in their underwear when they're at the computer, then you really need to disclose that you collect that data, and you may transfer that data to a third party, which in the case of MailChimp, you transfer it to a third party, and then they do something with it, and sometimes it ends up with Facebook, but they don't disclose how that happens. But you don't want your own Facebook moment. Okay, thoughts, just some thoughts. Define and publish your rules on how you review wines. And that can include a rating system, use UC Davis 20-point scale. Just describe how you're doing that. Use a global search locator site, such as Wine Searcher, so people can actually find the wine. There's a great article that was in the New York Times that Asimov wrote about 20 great budget wines. I could only find 4 of them anywhere near me. Open wine reviews up for comments. Okay, it'll build engagement. You may get some people who argue. They may say, no, that Chateau Leblanc was not a lousy wine. I really enjoyed that, which also opens up a discussion on how people's tastes differ. Our smell, our genome has about 2,000 genes in the genome for smell. The average human being only expresses about 150 of those. So if you take all the permutations and combinations of 2,000 different genes and try to figure out how many people have exactly the same set, you'll see why taste varies. And that's just the smell part. Taste is like that, etc. So that opens up a whole new avenue. And that's the kind of engagement you want, because the engagement produces results that you want. Keep it simple. Long, complicated descriptions confuse people. They're not going to help them select the wine. So don't try to be arty and put 6 fruit flavors or something in there, because, as Tim just pointed out, 3 is kind of the max, and most people can't even come up with the 3. My daughter has a superb palate, and she can come up with 3. I usually can't get past 2. And I've been a judge at the San Francisco International Wine Competition, other competitions. I allegedly know something about wine, and I can't write like that. So, more links. All right, we're going to, real quick, longer headlines are more prevalent, and sometimes they work better. Clickbait is out there, but clickbait does work, but you have to look and make sure that how you're writing the clickbait works. Here are just some heads. We frequently rewrite the headlines of the links that we have in NewsFetch because they're missing the point. Okay, and although here's a good one. They just reached a sweeping new NAFTA deal. Here's what's in it. Okay, these are some decent clickbait. Man dies after brain-eating amoeba. Here are the facts. At least they were the photos. These should go down. In each case, good clickbait comes up with what the essence of the article is, and then it adds one little piece that's a motivator. Here's what you can find. Here are the pictures. This happened while you slept. Watch coyote chase rabbit through Granite Bay neighborhood. I mean, obviously that's local, but you can see how those would make people want to click. These are some that we rewrote. This was a 0 headline. CBD, an exciting new fall schedule, or not. What? Okay, DEA could be loosening up on cannabis-derived drugs, okay? Wine industry faces changing market and economy. It's always faced the changing market and economy. That's, okay. CFOs expect a recession, grape growers see large market. New law on winery ads for certain retailer-hosted events. Boring. California wineries get more social media flexibility with some retailer events. So you can see, basically, we're looking at who is doing what to who. And it's more of an active kind of a construction. So you want to make sure that you're doing, and this is my good friend at Silicon Valley Bank, the annual Silicon Valley Bank Business Survey. Rob, what are you doing? Silicon Valley Bank's Wine Business Survey needs your participation. Okay? So, I'm almost done here. Article form, once again, short, tightly written, and when I mentioned, 1-minute editor paramedic method, okay? There is online, if you go to oneminuteeditor.com, it's a little site which I created for students like forever ago. It's like HTML 1.0 at this point. But what it does is it will mark all the forms of the verb to be. And then it'll mark all the prepositions. Because writing goes really long and boring when you put to be verbs and prepositions. They make this little train. And the one that, think of an article that begins, the driver of the truck was arrested and charged with drunken driving by police. Okay? Police arrested the truck driver for drunken driving. I mean, you can see that by pulling those out, what you do is you concentrate information. When you use active verbs and kill the prepositions that usually form around them, you cut anywhere from 25 to 30% of the words out. And this is not a college essay where you have to write 500 words, and that's why people use to be verbs and prepositions. You want to grab people with the information, so use that. Faces, if you're going to use okay. If you're going to use an illustration that you want to attract, use faces, use eyes. All the studies show they're the one place where people will look first on the page. All right, real quick. You can't yell at a crowd. Try to visualize the reader. What are they? What are their motivations? So, narrowcast, get a better look at who's your reader. This is where your feedback form and your comments on your reviews, etc. Without formal survey information, you can get a feel of where your users are coming from, what they're concerned about. So put a face on the prospect, okay? Think of them as a friend, think of somebody at your company, think of them as somebody that you can put a face on. Okay. Nobody's going to click on your content out of the goodness of their heart. You have to ask the question, why should I care? And you've got to look at that and say, why should I care about reading this? There's a list there. You can do that later. You got to start here. Anybody who's taken the psychology course knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you'll be amazed at the number of ways that you can address those kinds of things. In a sense, that's really esoteric, but that boils down to finding out or to describing why should I care. All right. Doing wine reviews. Oh my, I'm going to need time to open up for questions here. When you're doing wine reviews, look at the problems with words, how they mean different things to different people, how tastes vary from person to person, the psychology and the anxiety that people have. Wine is a high-stress thing. So people get just totally stressed out about talking about wine. They get embarrassed. Those kind of things. Each one of those links looks at those problems, recommendations, etc. Okay. This is in one of the other supplemental materials on that page where the presentation is. Okay, there's a whole thing in here about libel, privacy, defamation, lawsuits, etc. And there's a bunch of additional stuff here. I've been stressed out because my wife had surgery on her foot yesterday to reconstruct her ankle. Unfortunately, her sister and my daughter are there, but I've been going absolutely crazy trying to take care of that. So this is not as beautiful as it could be, and there's just some more stuff. Instant gratification, not showing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's it.
Lou, can you share the link to the presentation one more time?
Yeah. Is there a speed back on this? Well, sure there's a speed back. Okay? Literally, blink and you miss that. Okay, there's the link. And that link is cleverly hidden on wineindustryinsight.com. It'll be in the left-hand column all the way down at the bottom. I didn't want to just have anybody just grab that. So even if you don't get the exact link. Questions? Nope.
No.
Thank you, Lou. So every time on WineFetch, when you link to one of my posts, I get hundreds and hundreds of people who come to my blog to read it. How do you determine what you put on the WineFetch each morning?
Good, really good question, really good question. I go back to when I started and owned this wine importing company in Los Angeles. And between that and what I learned with wine business, I look at what would be the most important thing to me today in running my business. That goes into top news. And each of the categories is also oriented in priority order. So I look at your stuff and sometimes rewrite the headlines. But it's usually about regulation, it's usually about lawsuits, direct shipping. Sometimes there's a rant that goes down in the appropriate rant category. But that's how I determine whatever goes in there. Becca does the first pass on those, and then I spend probably another half hour or more moving things around. But based on running a wine company, I'm just trying to figure out what's going to be the most valuable.
So how does a blog get on your radar?
Wine Industry Insight started out as a blog. And in fact, when I owned Wine Business Monthly, we actually started something that was like a blog, but this was back in the 1990s. And there were no blogs, but there were bulletin board systems, and they're all text-based. And so we started a bulletin board system back in like 1994 or 95. So everything that I've been doing in the wine business since then has been founded in some way or another on the use of blogs.
Other questions?
So you said that.
Hold on. We can't hear you.
So you said that people follow blogs because of you. So does that mean it should be written in the first person?
Oh, I think it all depends. I mean, they're interested in you, and obviously, personal experiences can be that way. I think it's a matter of personal choice. I mean, in writing, I usually stay away from first person only because I always feel like it's being a little too self-indulgent. But that's just me and my personal idea. You may want to psychologically, are people more interested if it's you? I don't think so. Is it more interesting in more of a standard third person? I think what are you most comfortable with? And you may want to write a mixture of that. You may want to just mix up from one post to the next what person you use.
Questions, anybody?
So when you say short in an article, do you mean 500 words or 1,000? 200? Really good. Okay. People in a hurry want to get through something as quickly as they can, and for the most part, I try to stick to 250 to 500 words. There are times with some of the more lengthy articles that I'll go to 12 or 1,500 words. I mean, things like Medium and others are looking at long form, but I don't think long form catches on quite as well for pure hard fiction. I think it's always better if you look at something starting to look long form. First of all, punctuate with a lot of subheads, because subheads will keep people going down. They can skip from one to another according to their interest. At some point, you may want to look at the subhead and say, okay, that's another post. I'll just put that in another post. We need to.
Thanks, Alan. You'd mentioned earlier taking a screen capture of a quote. The other option is actually adding an image to break up the text as well. It serves the same functions as subhead, and and makes it much easier to read.
Absolutely. The more images you can put in there, the better. Absolutely.
Somebody have one over here?
Hi, so my question is, I actually write for print. I write for a magazine. And so it will be printed first, and then, and it's also through a local newspaper. So it will be in print first, and then it will also end up on their website. Okay, so in print, I am a little bit different than, as far as structure, than in online. So would you say in print you can go a little bit longer? In print, should the headline be longer or shorter? And we are talking about a lifestyle magazine that focuses primarily on, its readership is primarily upper middle class women. So a lot of glossy advertising and that sort of thing. So can you kind of speak to that?
I think good writing is good writing. I don't necessarily think that you need to write it differently in terms of word choice or overall structure. But on the other hand, if you've got something where you've got a long article in print, then yeah, it's probably best to break that up into shorter pieces. And you may even want to use more images than you did, maybe some outtakes of images that didn't go in the magazine, to use those online to keep people reading. But I think good, interesting writing is good, interesting writing. I don't necessarily think you have to tailor that print piece in a different way from the web.
One more question, anybody? Last question.
So I've been hearing a lot about trying to figure out what you want to write, what you want to say, but I'm curious, has there been any serious studies about what readers want to read, what they're looking for when they're going to wine blogs?
Not that I know of. That goes back to the issue of answering the question, why should I care? And I think it's going to vary from blog to blog, which is another reason for opening up things and encouraging comments and engagement. Because I think if you ask people, they will tell you. And there might even be room for a little, not a big recommendation, so like I'd recommend this to a friend, I wouldn't recommend this to a friend. And you would get some kind of feeling on how many people, would or wouldn't recommend that to a friend, and that will give you an idea of what you might want to put out there. But I've never seen anything like that.
So you have feedback. Go ahead, one more, last one, Suzanne.
Just on that topic, at Wine Search we of course look at every story and see how much traffic we're getting, so we analyse it really detail. You must do the same. You must know what stories get clicks. So what do you think goes well?
Okay, this is a good question. That's from Suzanne Kendrick at Wine Searcher. And I think, I can't see.
Yeah, the question was, does he analyze his own website to see what is actually popular?
I should. I should, but I don't. And one of the reasons that I don't is our privacy policy is we collect no data. We're seat of the pants on that with the daily email. There are no tracking pixels. We keep one piece of information, and that's an email. So we don't really have a good way of tracking that. But I'm a privacy advocate, and I don't like that or the bureaucracy associated and those. I mean, I understand the popularity of data for marketing and MarTech, but since I own it, I don't do that.
Thank you very much, Lou. Let's give him a big round of applause. And just so all of you know, that presentation link is there, but we will also send out presentations from everybody who has a presentation who wants to make it available. We are going to move on right now.
Keynote speaker.
Right now.
Keynote speaker.
Right now.
Keynote speaker.
Right now.
Keynote speaker.